In the East, great groups of people lived, connected, fought, and died together in a region that is known today as China. Welcome back to another episode of the Box on a Soapbox podcast. For today, we'll be doing a deep dive into the fascinating beginnings and legacy of the influential Qin dynasty of modern day China. Rising from the yet to be settled dust of war, the Qin dynasty, led by the near mythical emperor Qin Shi Huangdi, who solidified a grand unification of the lands, beginning a history of a 2,000-year-long imperial dynastic precedent lasting up to the 20th century. From the ascent of the first emperor to his death, and what came in before and after, we'll explore his impact, legacy, and remnants of the Qin dynasty today. Thank you for tuning in. If you like this episode, you can catch other stories like this of the Ox on a Soapbox podcast, wherever podcasts are available. Now, into today's episode. To understand the Qin dynasty, we must understand how the Qin, under Shi Huangdi, came to power. This begins, then, with the Warring States period. The Warring States period had 7 major contenders that were engaged with one another in long and contentious campaigns for dominance. This conflict lasted for over 2 centuries, documented between 481 BCE and 221 BCE. These so-called warring states were feudal states, each with its own established monarch or lord, and a hierarchy of local government officials. These states came about during the latter half of the Zhou dynasty, which at this point in time had lost its political power and cultural presence due to prior conflicts in the first half of the Zhou dynasty, known as the Spring and Autumn period. Looking at the map here, moving roughly from north to south geographically, the 7 key players were the Yan, Qi, Wei, Zhao, Han, Chen, and Chu states. As historian Mark Edward Lewis describes in his book, Warring States Political History, each of these 7 major states had specific characteristics that defined them, just as they were defined by their own geography. The Yan, located in the upper northeast region of the occupied lands, inhabited an area that was heavily forested and likely incredibly fertile, given that the mouth of the Yellow River emptied into these lands. The Yan territory achieved security through its remoteness and the absence of major threats from the north and the east, which allowed it to become a major player during the time of the Warring States. The Qi state was a prosperous one, located just south of the Yan state. It too had access to plentiful floodplains supplied by the Ji River, which sits below the Yellow River, while also having access to the Yellow Sea, and thus maritime resources. Given its well-resourced location, it was a demographic and economic center of the later to come Han period, and appeared to have similar strength during the Warring States period. The Wei state was one of a set of 3 states created by the partition of the former Jin state, which was a major power in the area until its breakup leading into the time period of the Warring States. Like the other successful states of the area, the Wei state contained significant access to river waterways, allowing it to be highly agricultural and commercialized. Since being a part of a former geographical power, the Wei state hosted a number of important trade centers, which provided a significant amount of wealth for the area. But, due to its geographical location being situated practically in the middle of all the other states, it was stuck on defense, unable to practically defend and attack at the same time. Next, we have the Zhao, the second of the set of 3 originating from the earlier Jin state. It shares a geographical area with the Yan state up north, meaning more secure defenses at a cost of weather and climate. However, the Zhao had frequent contact with the nomadic peoples from the north, who introduced horse riding and cavalry warfare to the Zhao state. Last, the broken Jin triad is the Han, with 2 N's in English, which helps to distinguish it from the later to come Han period. With little land to claim as its own, the Han state was often in alliance with other states, aligning themselves with whichever state was powerful at any given time. Moving on, there is the Qin state, the westernmost state of these players, and the eventual conqueror that brought an end to the Warring States period. Similar to the other states, much of the Qin's power came from climate and geography, as the Qin was situated in a fertile valley ringed by hills. This, coupled with a limited accessible routes to the Qin, secured it as a powerhouse, with the region later to be known as Guangdong province, and even further in future as modern-day Shanxi. Lastly is the Chu state. It is located at the southernmost end of these warring states' territories, and has significant access and control over much of the Yangtze River, the other major river system alongside the Yellow. By 221 BCE, the Qin state conquered its neighboring competitors, being led by the young lord Yingzeng and a host of experienced counselors and advisors, such as the famed politician and philosopher Li Se. Now, why are we here? Why do we care about all these states and geographical situations and rivers? Well, that's because of a young fictional man, a child in the early days, named Xiaolong, who lived in the city of Xianyang in the waning years of the Warring States period, through to the Qin dynasty. We'll follow him through his political shift and see the world through his eyes. When the Qin state conquered lands and unified the states together in 221 BCE, a significant part of the unification efforts meant that new standards were introduced, such as a standardized written language, unified weights and measures, a great wall, and a vast network of roads, alongside coins and other common and widespread items. Growing up at the very end of the Warring States period and into the First Imperial Dynasty, Xiaolong was raised in the Qin state, on the outskirts of the city of Xianyang, to an artisan sculptor father and a family of craftspeople and artisans. In his spare time, Xiaolong learned the craft of sculpting and figurine making, following in the footsteps of his father. There was a cultural and societal shift that Xiaolong was experiencing firsthand. Though coming from a family not of nobles or government officials, his family's work was often in the service of the government. When First Emperor Chen Shi Huangdi rose to power, a new government came to be, one to unify the lands together as a coherent nation, not one of feudal states and local lords. Of course, to young Xiaolong, this was much beyond his own comprehension, though he could tell this was important, given how busy his family, especially his father, had become with work. There was a burial tomb, a mausoleum, being built for the emperor. Though work on it had begun just a few years earlier, the onset of the new dynasty and the ascension of their feudal lord Yingzeng to the now Emperor Shi Huangdi meant that even more pressure was added to those working on the tomb. While Xiaolong's father was busy crafting for the new imperial government, Xiaolong himself grew up alongside great leaps in societal progress. He saw the family's land increase in size and ownership rights, though at a cost of taxation, which Xiaolong's father described as a necessary evil. What was once the dirt and dusty roads that Xiaolong had grown up playing on were now established in formal, earth-rammed roads. And the most impressive and mysterious of all was talk of a Great Wall being unified in the north. The Great Wall of China, as it is known today, was originally just many small, unconnected walls and outposts. These were built during past conflicts from a number of different states, but the Qin dynasty put forth the first concerted effort to connect these various sections of walls into one long, continuous span, running for over 1,000 kilometers. Now, Xiaolong wouldn't really have known about this next fact of the Great Wall, nor would many people not within the trusted circle of the emperor, but the wall had another purpose. The Great Wall was intended to keep the emperor's subjects in, as well as keep his enemies out. The Great Wall has many aspects to it, and its influence spans hundreds of years. But briefly, let's leave Xiaolong and his artisan family behind for a moment, stepping outside of the time frame of the Qin dynasty. There are numerous stories and cultural points tied to the Great Wall, which is understandable. The Qin dynasty only started the formation of the Great Wall, it did not complete it, as it would have and did take many, many years to be fully completed and updated. Between the 14th and 20th centuries, and the Ming and Qing dynasties, a popular folktale legend arose about the wall, named The Tale of the Maiden Mengjiang. It is a well-known story in contemporary Chinese society, and it is easy to see why. To call it China's Romeo and Juliet story, as Wilton Dema does in his book Mengjiang Nu Brings Down the Great Wall, is to hold a Western lens to the concept, but it is effective in getting the point across. The general story of Mengjiang goes something like this. There was once a scholarly man, Qi Liang, and a beautiful woman, Meng Jiang. They were a young husband and wife, deeply in love. But they lived during the Qin dynasty, and the emperor was a wicked man who used force and might to dictate his will over the lands. There was a great wall being built in the north, and conscripts from all over the nation were being summoned to work on the wall. It was well known to be a death sentence, as many of those workers who went never returned, and the husband and wife knew this as well. When Qi Liang was summoned to work on the wall, he left Meng Jiang with his meager possessions, property, and a broken heart. Meng Jiang was so worried and distressed by her scholarly husband being sent off to work on the wall that she eventually became gaunt and thin, knowing that he may very well never return home. But they were in love, and she was a dedicated wife to an honorable husband. And so, with a set of Qi Liang's winter clothes packed, Meng Jiang left to go see her husband herself. It was a perilous journey, heading deeper north into the bitter winter, but she was determined. Her journey was tough, full of difficult weather and terrain, but this did not stop her. When she was faced with hallucinations of her husband urging her to return home and abandon him to death, she refused to listen. When innkeepers and the peoples of the towns that she traveled through told her it was a futile effort, she refused to listen. After a long and treacherous journey, she made her way to the place where the wall was being built, but could not find her way. She encountered a group of laborers, whom she then asked for directions and about her husband Qi Liang. With sorrow, they told her that he had passed away, that his body was not meant for heavy labor, and had given way to the heavy stones. The laborers, not wanting to abandon his body to the difficult weather, buried him within the wall, his bones one with the structure. Meng Jiang wailed and sobbed at the news, overcome with grief that she was too late to deliver her husband's winter clothes to offer him protection from the elements. But Meng Jiang was determined to reach her husband still, and, while cursing the heavens and the emperor, continued on her way to the Great Wall where her husband was buried. Once arriving at the wall, she cried out for her husband, lamenting sorrows and apologies with tears streaming down her face. Whether by the blessings of the heavens or by her own will, a large section of the Great Wall came crashing down, revealing a massive pile of bones from other deceased laborers buried within. Meng Jiang stared at the mountain of white and begged the deceased to allow her to find her husband. She pricked her finger and bled, and asked that only her husband's bones would accept her blood, running off of others. Eventually, she found the remains of Qi Liang and gathered them in his own winter clothes. However, the loud crashing of the wall had alerted the officials overseeing the wall and had alerted their own superiors. News of his loyal, beautiful, and dedicated wife made its way to the emperor, who immediately wanted this woman for himself. The emperor traveled to the wall where the woman was apprehended, Qi Liang's bones still in her arms. The emperor made an offer to the woman, asking her to be in his court, and she agreed, with the pretense that a long funeral service was to be held for her deceased husband. Hastily, the emperor agreed. On the last day of the funeral rites, held at where the Great Wall met the sea, the emperor approached the woman once again, who was still holding her husband's bones. Impressed by this dedication, he offered once more, to which Meng Jiang now refused. In an act of defiance, she jumped into the ocean, joining her husband in the afterlife. The heavens looked down upon her with favor, as she was a good wife, and immortalized her as a silver fish that swam by where the wall met the sea. Moved by this loyal sacrificial act, the emperor raised a temple for Meng Jiang, immortalizing her in the pantheon of the gods. This story, any version of it, would not have been known to young Xiaolong or anyone who he would have known for over 1,000 years, but captures the Qin dynasty in an interesting light. Emperor Shi Huangdi was known to rule through the military, since ruling over a newly unified nation made up of conquered former enemies was not an easy endeavor, let alone attempting to unify and standardize the new dynasty. Some other actions that Shi Huangdi took to strengthen his dynasty, including the abolishing of former state feudal holdings, as well as the compelled movement of other noble families to the new capital, Xianyang, where our own Xiaolong lived. Very much a keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer atmosphere. New currency was established, with which Xiaolong himself had much fun playing with, given a square-shaped hole in the middle of each coin, made to string them along for holding. National audits and censuses were established, and the standardization of axle sizes for carts and chariots was enforced, helping both their transportation of goods and military, just like how we today have the U.S. highway system, which was initially conceptualized for military movement. Additionally, not all new initiatives were good, however. Feeling threatened by criticism from Confucian scholars, Shi Huangdi had books burned, with the exception of books about medicine, forestry, agriculture, and divination. Scholars opposed to the emperor's viewpoints were also said to have been buried alive. This, as has been in any other time in history when such travesties occurred, was a great loss of knowledge, by which later Chinese scholars viewed the Qin dynasty with disdain and the anti-intellectual atmosphere. But all so-called progress and unification efforts were interrupted with the untimely death of Shi Huangdi in 210 BCE. But this was not entirely an unexpected outcome. Despite the emperor's fear of death, Shi Huangdi wanted to achieve immortality and had ordered the construction of his own mausoleum at Mount Li, a place where heavenly deities were believed to have resided, the place where Xiaolong's father was sent to work. This is Emperor Shi Huangdi's terracotta tomb. Before we continue, a quick word from today's sponsor, the Emperor Shi Huangdi's Mausoleum Construction Corps. Want to dedicate your life's work to our heavenly Emperor Shi Huangdi? To show your love and admiration for his great efforts towards unifying our neighbors under his divine rule? Well, do we have an opportunity for you? If you are a skilled sculptor, artist, pottery maker, bronzesmith, jadesmith, armorsmith, weaponsmith, plumber, or just like digging dirt, come on over to Mount Li and join your loyal citizens in creating a beautiful tomb for our glorious Emperor Shi Huangdi. If you show up and mention Ox on a Soapbox 20 during conscription, you'll receive 20 hours of rest for free. Imperial terms and conditions apply. Showing up at a work site is your explicit consent to formal conscription and manual labor restricted to a tomb. No formal compensation is provided. Non-compliance with imperial instruction may lead to penalties, including death. Ask your local government officials for more details if interested. This message was from the Emperor Shi Huangdi's Mausoleum Construction Corps. And now, back to our podcast. The mausoleum of the first Emperor Shi Huangdi is located near modern-day Xi'an. It is one of the oldest capital cities in Chinese history, and therefore stands amongst the oldest in the world. But in Xiaolong's time, the city was still called Xianyang, and the first emperor had just been buried in his tomb. Xiaolong, having been a child when Shi Huangdi rose to power, was now in his mid-30s and a skilled sculptor like his own father. But his father was gone, having been trapped within the tomb alongside hundreds of other artisans and laborers. Xiaolong and his family were told that this was done to ensure that the emperor would have sufficient staffing for all his needs in the afterlife. But this was likely propaganda. From our perspective here in the 21st century, it is assumed that the ritual sacrifice was, at least, partially due to wanting to maintain the secrets of the tomb and treasures within. In fact, even to this day, the full mausoleum has not yet been fully excavated, with work having begun in the 1970s due to the tomb being discovered by a group of Chinese peasants who just wanted to dig a well. It is at this point that we should clarify the terms tomb, mausoleum, and necropolis, as these terms are used in a variety of texts and references almost interchangeably. While their general meaning is roughly the same, meaning a place of ritual burial, there are some key differences. Tomb is the most general of these terms. Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines the word as a house, chamber, or vault for the dead. Mausoleum, then, is a type of tomb with a specific architectural language to it. Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines this term as a usually stone building with places for entombment of the dead above ground. Instead of being buried beneath the earth, mausoleums are typically raised above the ground and may sometimes allow for entry by the living. A necropolis, then, is defined by Merriam-Webster as a large, elaborate cemetery of an ancient city. Given the makeup of the word necro, meaning dead, and polis, meaning city, this makes sense. In this context, a necropolis would refer to the burial complex in its entirety. As a reference for scale, Emperor Shi Huangdi's tomb occupies an area larger than the area taken by the biggest Khufu pyramid in Egypt, the Great Pyramid, which is considerably vast on its own right. Thus far, we've only dealt with the terms tomb and mausoleum, and for clarity's sake, we will continue with just tomb, unless otherwise pertinent. And from here, we will also move away from our fictional friend Xiaolong and his family, as the contents of the tomb were likely highly guarded secrets, as the artisan and labor sacrifices may indicate. And so Xiaolong would provide a less useful perspective. We shall wish him the best of luck and carry on. When the Chinese peasants came across curious artifacts in the 1970s, news of the discovery made its way to local authorities and then to the Chinese state officials. However, excavation efforts were not easy, as the crucial aspect of the tomb was extremely sensitive. When the various statues, figures, and relics within the tomb were exposed to the fresh air that they had not felt for over 2,000 years, the layers of paint that were still on them quickly oxidized and dissipated away, their colorful luster gone with the wind. The first excavation campaign was temporarily halted by this realization, spanning from 1978 to 1984. Overall, 3 excavation pits were initially made for Shi Huangdi's necropolis, with Pit 2 and Pit 3 opened in 1976. Limited by the technology needed for the preservation of the paint, excavation of new pits was extremely limited. though the sizes of pits 1, 2, and 3 provided plenty of artifacts to sift through. Pit 1, the largest, covers an area of about 16,300 meters squared. Pit 2 covers an area of about 6,000 meters squared, and Pit 3 is the smallest, coming in at about 520 meters squared. These pits were found to contain a plethora of life-sized terracotta soldiers, horses, and war chariots, with many other related artifacts found around. These terracotta soldiers have become the namesake and icon of the tomb, with the name Terracotta Army more colloquially known than as the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor. The other famous aspect of the Terracotta Army is the design of the soldiers themselves. There is a discussion on whether the soldiers should be viewed as realistic human representations or as conceptual art pieces. This discussion comes from the fact that every single soldier in the tomb is incredibly lifelike, with great imitation on the variants that real-life human beings show in their own appearances. Initial observations of the soldiers noted that no two faces are alike, which has now been disproven, but that original perception on the soldiers speaks volumes about the level of detail that the artisans and craftspeople of the Qin dynasty bestowed upon these statues. The construction of these figures also alludes to the power and cohesion of the working class and the workshops where they crafted these pieces in a practically assembly line process that Henry Ford would have been jealous of. The terracotta soldiers were crafted together piecewise, likely on site, with modular, standardized statue components coming from a certain number of molds. However, beyond this modular mixing and matching of heads and hands and feet, artisans were able and often did imbue their own details and personal elements into the pieces that they worked on. Most commonly represented their facial expressions and unique personal stamped inscriptions. However, these excavated pits, filled with statues of soldiers, horses, chariots, and a smattering of real weapons and tools, are not a part of the primary emperor's burial site. Instead, Shi Huangdi's mausoleum is located underneath a buried mound standing over 50 meters high. In an effort by the Chinese government to not disturb the first emperor's burial tomb due to a lack of sufficient technology to properly excavate the site, researchers turned to using advanced scanners and sensors to reveal structures buried beneath the earth. Their scans, conducted between 2001 and 2003, revealed an intricate and complex structure of rammed earth. The main structure follows a rectangular space with a 30-meter wall with 9 distinct steps. Remnants of built wooden structures were also observed on some steps. This 9-stepped wall is noted to be unique in construction compared to other Chinese tombs excavated before, with the style itself being called the Qin Mausoleum style. From historical texts referring to the mausoleum, the tomb of Shi Huangdi himself is said to have replica rivers of flowing mercury, ceilings inlaid with pearls to represent the night sky, and lamps filled with fish oil to burn for eternity. The mausoleum of Shi Huangdi also differs not just in the level of detail and precious metals and luxury goods hosted within, but also with its purpose. Shi Huangdi wanted this tomb to be for him and him alone, deviating from traditional necropolis structures that were shared between members of a royal family. This furthers the notion Shi Huangdi brought about many changes in society, both favorable and not. He is often seen in a modern light as a shrewd, selfish, and tyrannical leader, but his efforts in unifying what was to become China is no small feat to be ignored either. In fact, the very name China comes from the Qin dynasty, with Qin being pronounced as Qin, and the West calling it as such, the land of Qin, China. When looking within the excavated tombs, there are a plethora of items buried within. Many of it is related to their military power, with real swords, spears, weapons, chariots, and armors all throughout. But there are also artistic pieces not for war, but for culture. One of these art pieces is the bronze goose statues, found in Pit 7, far from the terracotta army. The pit contained 57 different bronze bird statues and figures, which apparently were noted to be favorites of Shi Huangdi. I too like birds, not turtles, and these bronze and patinaed geese give off a lighthearted atmosphere in what otherwise would be a very serious setting. The details on these birds, as with the rest of the statues and figures entombed in a necropolis, are intricate and lively, as if the statues were cast with a real bird within the mold. The attention to detail and subject matter of these bronze birds speak to the Qin dynasty itself. The coming to power through 200 years of war, constant armed conflict was not the sole defining aspect of the Warring States period. Everyday people still lived and thrived in these spaces, in these tumultuous times, and their influence on our world was there, no matter the scale. Ancient Chinese history, including that of the Qin dynasty, focused primarily on nobles and a powerful elite. Though this generally means a spectrum of people ranging from experienced war generals to mature philosophers to ranked government officials, a large part of society, the common person, was often undocumented. People like Xiaolong and his family weren't parts of the noble assembly, and therefore did not receive the same attention from scholars of the time and of future dynasties that will have more permanently enshrined them in history and in formal literature and traditions. By this point, the lands now known as China already had millions of people living, and just like so many others, it was easy, and still is easy, to reduce individuals to just numbers, statistics. 700,000 laborers were conscripted to build Shi Huangdi's tomb, and yet none of their names have survived. But their efforts and willpower have survived, and that is what we have to remember them by now. Nobles and peasants alike lived, connected, fought, and died together, if not tangentially at times, but their stories remain interwoven and inexplicably connected, with one being unable to stand on its own without the other. This has been a brief introductory piece on a Qin dynasty, Shi Huangdi, and his mausoleum. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, please subscribe to Ox on a Soapbox wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, friends and foes, and have a calorific day.